السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم اهد قلبي وسدد لساني واسلل سخيمة قلبي. آمين يا رب العالمين. Inshallah, today we will begin with the story of Adam alayhi salam in the Quran. And the reason why we begin with the story of Adam alayhi salam in the Quran is because Adam alayhi salam was awwalul bashar. He was the first human being, and he was also the first prophet. And the first story among the stories of the prophets in the Quran is in fact the story of the creation of Adam alayhi salam. And this is why it is best to begin this series of stories from the Quran with the story of Adam alayhi salam. Adam alayhi salam, who was the first human being on earth, the first prophet, and his story is also the first story in the Book of Allah. We learn in a hadith that a man asked the Prophet ﷺ, "Anabiyyan kana Adam? Was Adam alayhi salam a prophet?" And the Prophet ﷺ replied, "Na'am, yes, he was a prophet, and he was also mukallam, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to him directly." Generally we think that Musa alayhi salam, he is the one whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to directly, because Musa alayhi salam is Kalimullah. But he is not the only prophet with whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke with directly. We learn that minhum man kallam Allah. Among the prophets are those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke with directly. And among them is of course Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke with directly at the occasion of Mi'raj. And also before that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Adam alayhi salam directly, as the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam also explained. Adam alayhi salam was chosen by Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Adam alayhi salam above the rest of the creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى آدَمَ وَنُوحًا وَآلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَآلَ عِمْرَانَ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. That indeed Allah chose Adam, and Allah chose Nuh, and Allah chose the family of Ibrahim, and Allah chose the family of Imran over the worlds. The question is, how exactly did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose Adam alayhi salam? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Adam alayhi salam by giving him preference over the worlds, as we see in this ayah, عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ, meaning over the entire creation. How? First of all, by creating him by his own hands. Secondly, by blowing the soul into him, the ruh into him. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him, gave him preference over the rest of the creatures by commanding the angels to make sajda to him, to prostrate to him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Adam alayhi salam by making him stay in Jannah. Subhanallah. And he lived in Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Adam alayhi salam by giving him knowledge, by giving him wisdom, by giving him the intellect, the ability to have free will, and also have self-regulation, by which he became superior to the rest of the creation of the time. And this is why the children of Adam alayhi salam, the descendants of Adam alayhi salam, are also superior to the rest of the creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. And certainly we gave honor to the children of Adam alayhi salam. So think about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored Adam and also the children of Adam. And for this favor, we should thank Allah Azza wa Jal. The favor that He made us human. He could have made us into any other creature. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to make you and I into human beings. He made us the children of Adam. And this is a huge privilege, a huge honor. Now Adam alayhi salam is called awwalul bashar, the first human being. And he's also called Abul Bashar, the father of all humanity. And we learn in the hadith that on the Day of Judgment, the believers will go to Adam alayhi salam and they will ask him, Ya Abana, istaftah lana al-Jannah. That, O our Father, have the gate of paradise opened for us. So they will address Adam alayhi salam as who? As their father. They will say, O our Father. And he will reply to them that it was nothing but the mistake of your father that brought you out of paradise. So I am not worthy of having its gates opened. Go to my son Ibrahim, the friend of Allah. So in this hadith we see that first of all, people will call Adam alayhi salam their father. Secondly, he will also refer to himself as their father, the father of humanity. And then he will refer to Ibrahim alayhi salam as his son, right? He will say that go to my son Ibrahim. So Adam alayhi salam is the first human being and the father of all humanity. Now, Adam alayhi salam is mentioned 25 times in the Book of Allah. And his story, the story of his creation, and the story of how he was in Jannah, and then how he was removed from there, this story is mentioned in several places in the Quran. It is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, it is mentioned in Surah Al-A'raf, it is mentioned in Surah Al-Isra, in Surah Al-Kahf, in Surah Taha. And this means that the story of Adam alayhi salam is repeated in the Quran. It is mentioned many times in the Quran. But it is mentioned in more detail in 3 places. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-A'raf, and Surah Taha. There is more detail in these 3 surahs. Now, first thing I want to clarify is that when we see that the stories of the prophets are repeated in the Quran, they're mentioned in one surah and then they're again mentioned in another surah, what is the wisdom behind that? Because typically, we would think that if a story has been told once, then that is sufficient because people know about it now. It doesn't need to be related again, right? And typically it happens that when someone tells you a story of their life once and you get to know them better, but then they repeat that story again and you're like, yes, you listen along as if you were listening for the first time. But then if they repeat it a third or a fourth time, you say, yeah, you told me that before, right? You get bored of listening to the same story again and again. So why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats the story of Adam alayhi salam in the Quran? Because first of all, this teaches us that the Quran is not a book of information alone. It doesn't just give us knowledge and information. No, the Quran is for the purpose of guidance. And when you are guiding, when you are reminding, then you don't just mention something important once. You mention it repeatedly. And you mention it each time in a different way. So, this teaches us that the stories in the Quran are not for the purpose of information. They are for the purpose of guiding us. Secondly, the repetition of the stories indicates the importance of these stories. These are stories which are very important for us to know, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has repeated them in the Quran. And thirdly, when a story is repeated over and over again, what happens is that the listener is able to remember it and know it very well. They're able to grasp it. They remember every detail. Because the first time you hear a story, it is possible that you miss some details, right? You overlook some details. You don't pay attention to certain things. Or certain lessons don't click. But then, when the same story you hear it, you read it the second time, you notice things that you missed the first time. You learn things that you missed the first time. Right? And your overall knowledge of the story, it becomes stronger. Then, the repetition of stories in the Quran also reflects the different audiences that the Quran addresses. Because we see that, for example, the story of Adam alayhi salam is mentioned in Surah Al-A'raf, right? And Surah Taha in great detail. And both of these surahs are actually Makki surahs. And in Makki surahs, primarily, it is the non-Muslims who are addressed. So the style of narration is different. Alright? On the other hand, Surah Al-Baqarah, where the story of Adam a.s. is also mentioned, is a Madani surah. And in Madani surahs, it is mainly the Muslims who are addressed. So again, the style is different. And you will notice that when you tell a story to one person, you relate it in a way that they can understand it, that they will be able to benefit from it. But the same story, when you relate it to a child, then what happens? Your language is different, your vocabulary is different. The details you focus on are also different. Right? So the repetition reflects the different audiences who have been addressed when these stories have been related. Then we see that the repetition of the stories in the Quran also shows us the eloquence of the Quran. Because the same story is being repeated but in a different style, with different words. Alright, so it shows us the eloquence, the richness of the language of the Quran. And then finally, the repetition of the stories in the Quran also establishes the truth of the Quran. Because when stories are made up, then what happens? And if a person invents a story about what they did, for instance, they will give one version to one person, and the second time that they are narrating that story, they will maybe say something that contradicts the first version, right? And over time, you see that the lie is exposed. But the stories in the Quran, even though they are repeated, they are consistent. Yani, in spite of repetition, there is no contradiction. There are different details that we find in different passages so that we can develop a more detailed and thorough understanding, but there is no contradiction. So, the story of Adam a.s. is mentioned more than once in the Quran, and our goal will be to go over all of the verses that talk about Adam a.s. And inshallah, what I'll do is that as we're going over, for example, a passage that talks about the story of Adam a.s., any verse that is similar, that is mentioned elsewhere, inshallah, I will quote it there. Alright? So first of all, let's go over the overview, basically, of the story of Adam a.s. Okay, the overview, a brief overview of the story of Adam a.s. What is the story of Adam a.s.? We see that before the creation of human beings, before the creation of Adam a.s., Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already created angels and the jinn. The angels were made from light, and their purpose is to engage in the praise and glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times. And it is well known that the angels never disobey Allah. So that is what the angels were doing from before, yani before even Adam a.s. was created. Jinn were made from fire, and jinn have free will. So of course among them are those who are righteous and those who are not. And before the creation of Adam a.s., different creatures already existed. Alright? Within the heavens and also within the earth. Different creatures already inhabited the earth. And according to many scholars, it is the jinn who predominantly inhabited the earth. Just like right now, you see that it is people who predominantly inhabit the earth. It doesn't mean that they're the only creatures that inhabit the earth. No, they predominantly inhabit the earth. Meaning no matter where you go, it is basically human beings that you will find. Right? Now, before, it was the jinn who predominantly inhabited the earth. And on account of their free will, they created a lot of mischief on earth. They caused bloodshed. And they were immersed in sin and in disbelief. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to create a new creation and inhabit that on earth, replace the jinn with the human beings on earth, He informed the angels about that. So the angels inquired, they asked, that will you place on earth a creation that will cause mischief on earth and cause bloodshed? The angels made that assumption that this new creation will cause mischief on earth, will cause bloodshed. Why? Based on their prior knowledge of what the jinn had done on the earth. So, the angel said that we are already worshipping you, we are already glorifying you, So essentially, there is no need to create another creation, especially if that creation will also cause bloodshed and mischief on earth. So there is no need. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded that I know what you do not know. I know the good in creating this creation, and you do not know of that good. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam from clay and blew the soul into him and created his wife Hawa and brought out the souls of all of his children to be born until the day of judgment. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam. Why? In order to establish the superiority of Adam alayhi salam over the angels and by extension all of the creation. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam, it is well known that all of the angels prostrated in immediate obedience to the command of Allah. But Iblis, who is a jinn and was among the angels at the time, refused to obey the command of his Lord. And his refusal was based on pride and thinking, great of himself. He was displaying arrogance, and he gave the justification that I am better than Adam, so it does not befit me that I should prostrate to Adam. And due to his refusal and disdain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removed Iblis from his presence and rendered him rejected and cursed. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused Adam and his wife Hawa to stay in paradise and told them to eat freely from wherever they wanted and how much ever they pleased. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pointed out a tree to them and told them to not eat from that tree at all. Now when Shaitan learned that Adam and Hawa are forbidden from eating from a particular tree, he got busy in trying to cause them to slip and eat from that tree. So Adam alayhi salam fell to the trap of Iblis, and both Adam and Hawa ate of the tree, because of which the garments of paradise were taken away from them, and they were also removed from paradise. Adam alayhi salam realized his mistake, and he repented to Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his repentance and forgave him and chose him for his prophethood. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him to the earth and caused the human race to grow and thrive on the earth from Adam and Hawa. So this is the brief overview of the story of Adam alayhi salam. Now let's see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story in the Quran. How, first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed the angels about the fact that He was going to create Adam alayhi salam, and how the angels responded to that. And then inshallah we'll talk about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam. So in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 30, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. And recall when your Lord said to the angels that indeed I am going to place a point in the earth, a khalifa, a successor. The angel said, will you appoint in the earth someone who will cause mischief in it and someone who will cause bloodshed, while we glorify you with your praise and declare your purity? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that indeed I know what you do not know. The ayah begins with وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ, and recall when your Lord said to the angels. The word إِذْ means when, and there is an implied command over here that udhkur, recall when such and such happened. Yani, remember the time, recall the time when your Lord said to the angels. And in this is actually an indication for us to imagine, this conversation, to imagine this incident, Yani to bring that to our mind. Why? So that we can follow closely. So that we can be present in the story, we can pay attention, and we can relate with it, and we can understand it better, and we can take lesson from it. So, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ, and recall when your Lord said, meaning take yourself back to that time and recall, imagine in your mind, think in your mind, when your Lord said to the angels. The angels, malaika, the word malaika is derived from uluka, which means to send messages, alright, to deliver messages. And the angels are called malaika because this is what they primarily do. They deliver, they carry out the messages, the instructions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the universe. And the best of this is that they deliver Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech and His revelation to people. And this is why Angel Jibreel is the best of the angels, because his role was to deliver Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word to His messengers. Now the angels are a world of their own, and they are a creation that is separate from human beings, that is separate from the jinn. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them from light, and they're known for their purity because they do not commit sin, they do not disobey Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has assigned them different tasks which they carry out within the creation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the angels, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing the angels that I am going to appoint in the earth a successor. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving the angels the good news that a new creation will now inhabit the earth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing them. Why? Because this matter would affect the angels, right? Because the angels carry out different tasks within the universe, and now all of a sudden, on the earth, there's a new creation that is going to predominantly inhabit it. So the angels need to know. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs them from before, even though He is not obligated to, as if He is giving them a good news. In Surah Sad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي خَالِقٌ بَشَرًا مِّن طِينٍ. When your Lord said to the angels that indeed I am going to create a human being from clay. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ. Indeed, I am one who makes, one who appoints. And in Surah Sad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي خَالِقٌ. I am one who creates. Now notice, it has not been said that أَنِّي أَخْلُقُ, that I am going to create. Yani a verb has not been used, right? Rather, a noun has been used. جَاعِل, خَالِق. جَاعِل is maker, appointer. خَالِق is creator. So a noun is used instead of a verb. Why? Because a noun, grammatically, is stronger than a verb. Yani, when you use a verb, it shows that the action is being done only once. Alright? And it's just being done right now. But when a noun is used, then it shows that this action is done repeatedly, or it's done in a stronger way. Yani when a noun is used in place of a verb, it shows that the action is stronger. There's a difference between saying, I am cooking, from I am a cook. Yani there's a difference between saying I am cooking versus I am a cook. Yani a cook is noun, right? Yani someone who is known for cooking, someone who is a master, someone whose specialty is cooking, someone who knows how to cook. And if someone says, I am cooking, well, that doesn't tell us anything about their specialty, their strength, their ability to cook, and the way in which they will cook, right? Likewise, if someone says, I am teaching versus I am a teacher, there's a difference. I am teaching means I'm just doing it right now. And I'm a teacher means that this is my profession, right? And there's difference in level of skill. which indicates difference in the way that the action is done. So when a noun is used in place of a verb, it shows that the action is much stronger, it is much more perfect, and it is certain, even if it has not yet occurred. So, inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa means that I am certainly one who appoints on the earth a successor, meaning there is no doubt about this. I am certainly going to do this. This is factual. This is going to happen. And there is no doubt about this. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Now, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that I am going to place on the earth a khalifa? And why is Adam alayhi salam being referred to as a khalifa? Well, first of all, the question is, who exactly is a khalifa? Khalifa is a successor. Yani someone who comes after someone has departed. Okay? Like imagine there is a CEO of a company, and then they retire. So they will be succeeded by a new CEO. So the new CEO is who? The Khalifa of the previous CEO. Alright? So Khalifa is who? A successor. Then the word Khalifa is also used for someone who is appointed on behalf of someone in their absence. So imagine there is a class teacher who is, for some reason, not able to be in her class. So is she going to leave her class unattended? No. What's going to happen? There is going to be a supply teacher, right? So that supply teacher is there in order to do what the main teacher is not able to do, right? She's taking her place. She is her representative, right? So this is also one of the meanings of Khalifa, a representative. Here, what does Khalifa mean? It does not mean representative, because no one can be the Khalifa of Allah on earth in that sense. Okay? It does not mean that Allah is no longer able to pay attention to the earth, and so someone else is needed to take care of the earth. No way. That is an incorrect understanding. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Khaliq, the Malik, the Mudabbir of the earth. Right? He is Qayyimus samawati wal ardi wa man fihin. He is the caretaker, the provider, the nourisher, the protector of the heavens and the earth and whoever is in them. He is Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum. Yani the entire creation depends on him. Right? So he is constantly guarding وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. He is constantly guarding and protecting the heavens and the earth, maintaining them, looking after them, causing them to live and exist. And their existence depends entirely on him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not appointed Adam or human beings as his representative on earth. No. He is actively providing for and taking care of the earth. So what does Khalifa mean over here then? Khalifa over here means, first of all, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has appointed Adam as the Khalifa on earth, as in the one to implement the law of Allah on earth. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has appointed Adam and his children as the creation that will predominantly inhabit the earth and will establish the law of God on earth. And if you think about it, among all the different creatures that exist on the earth, it is the human beings that predominantly exist. And you go to any continent, you go to any terrain, you go to any climate, you will find human beings. Right? And because human beings have, traveled to different parts of the earth and inhabited there, different creatures have also gone along with them. Right? And also we see that as human beings inhabit different parts of the earth, they're the ones who, for example, construct buildings, roads and things like that. And the rest of the creatures don't do that, even though they have a lot of skill. Like, for example, elephants are very strong, but elephants don't make roads. monkeys are able to use their hands and feet, very quickly, but they don't make stuff in factories. So neither the jinn do this, nor the birds, nor the animals, nor the angels. It is human beings who do this kind of work on earth, that they inhabit the earth as appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has inspired human beings different skills and the knowledge to do different things. So for example, Dawood alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught him how to make chainmail, right? Iron was made malleable for him, so he was able to make chainmail with iron, right? So this is one meaning, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will appoint Adam alayhi salam as the Khalifa on earth, meaning one who will predominantly inhabit the earth. Secondly, what this shows us is that before Adam alayhi salam, the earth was already inhabited by different creatures. And there was another creation that predominantly lived on earth, and they were removed, they were caused to go extinct or removed, and Adam alayhi salam replaced them. So he succeeded them. Alright? He succeeded them. Adam and his children succeeded them. And this is something that makes a lot of sense, because when you, for example, learn about how old the earth is, for example, you take a basic biology class even, basic science class, and you find out that the earth is millions of years old. And then, there are fossils that, people have found that are millions of years old. Alright? You go to a museum and you see, for example, a bug that has been fossilized and that lived before perhaps thousands of years ago. And we know that human history is not that old. So you wonder, how is that possible? Isn't Adam alayhi salam the first human being? Adam alayhi salam is the first human being, but he's not the first creature to live on the earth or to inhabit the earth. So different creatures predominantly lived on the earth, alright? And they were succeeded by Adam alayhi salam. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Khalifa means that Adam alayhi salam succeeded the previous creatures that predominantly existed on the earth. And this meaning is very, very plausible. The third interpretation is that this creation is going to succeed one another. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, meaning this creation is going to succeed one another. So one generation will be succeeded by another, which will be succeeded by another, which will be succeeded by another. And this is true, of course. Adam alayhi salam, he was succeeded by his children, who were succeeded by their children, who were succeeded by their children. And this has been going on since that time and will carry on until the Day of Judgment. But if you think about it, this is not unique to human beings. We see, for example, cats. Cats are succeeded by other cats, which are succeeded by other cats, which are succeeded by other cats. All the creatures on the earth are like that. That they live on the earth generation after generation. Another interpretation is that Khalifa over here means that the prophets of Allah, they are appointed by Allah, to carry out, to establish His law, and the rest of the people are their successors. Okay? So Adam alayhi salam, he was given a law by Allah which he established, and then his children, they succeeded him in implementing that law, in living that law. And then after some time, Nuh alayhi salam was the messenger. He was given a law which he established, and then the people after him continued to establish that law. Okay? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَكُمْ خَلَائِفَ الْأَرْضِ, that He is the one, Allah is the one who has made you people the khala'if on the earth. The successors on the earth. You are the predominant inhabitants on the earth. Alright? So what happened? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the angels that إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, what was the response of the angels? قَالُوا, they said, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءِ, are you going to place in the earth someone who is going to cause mischief and cause bloodshed? The angels asked this question not as an objection. And this is very important to understand. The angels do not disobey Allah. And if they do not disobey Allah, that means that they would never disrespect Allah. Right? They always glorify and praise Allah. So they would never, ever disrespect Allah by objecting, by raising an objection against His decision. Alright? The reason why the angels are asking is because they want to understand. They want to know the wisdom. That why? Why is another creation replacing the present creation if this new creation will succeed them and will have, free will create mischief and cause bloodshed? What's the benefit? If the purpose is that they will worship Allah, well, we are already worshipping Allah. So they wanted clarification. They wanted to understand. And this shows us that it is perfectly fine to ask questions as long as they come from a place of respect and they come from a place of curiosity and a place of wonder. Asking questions from a place of arrogance, from a place of criticism, that is wrong. We see in the Quran people who asked why the Qibla was changed. They said, مَا وَلَّاهُمْ عَنْ قِبْلَتِهِمُ الَّتِي كَانُوا عَلَيْهَا. What has turned the Muslims away from the Qibla which they used to face before? That question was coming from a place of criticism. It was coming from a place of ridicule, coming from a place of arrogance. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called such people as-sufaha, foolish. The angels are asking from a place of genuine curiosity, alright? And they want to understand. So their question was not wrong. Now, they said that أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا, someone who will create mischief in the earth, fasad in the earth. Now, fasad is to ruin something, to corrupt something, such that it is no longer within its range of normalcy. Okay? And it is not normal, it has now become corrupt. So for example, if you have food, right? And let's say you have yogurt, and the first day the yogurt is really nice and fresh. The second day you see that some water has separated from it. Alright? The third day again you see that the water has separated from it. Now, let's say you forgot to refrigerate it, and the next day you see that the yogurt, it has a strange smell. And then you see that it has some mold on it. So it is no longer within its normal range. Right? So now it has become spoiled. It has become corrupt. This is fasad. So they asked that, are you going to place on the earth someone who's going to create mischief, meaning someone who's not going to let things remain normal? He is going to cause disorder. Like for example, the earth needs a certain amount of foliage on it, alright, trees, in order to clean the air, in order to sustain the creatures that exist on it. But when human beings destroy foliage, trees, and forests, what happens as a result of that? As a result of that, that balance has been disturbed, right? And as a result of that, so many ecosystems have been destroyed, so many creatures are going extinct, alright? So this is fasad. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا. Fasad is not just in a tangible sense, it is also in the intangible sense. Fasad is also to disobey Allah. Because when people disobey Allah, then what happens? They end up harming one another. Right? For instance, part of obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that either you speak well or you remain silent. And you don't say words that are hurtful. And hurtful words include mocking people, insulting them. Now if, for example, in a room you're sitting with someone and you are talking in a good way, you're saying something nice, you're talking in a normal way, everything's good, right? It's a good vibe. But if you insult them, one insult even, one statement in which you're poking fun at them, you're disobeying Allah, alright, first of all. But then what's going to happen? You're going to ruin the vibe in the room, right? Everyone's going to feel on edge. And the relationship between you and that person is going to get damaged. So, fasad is not just in the tangible sense, it's also in the intangible sense. Yani, to cause corruption in the earth is to ruin the earth physically and to also commit sin and disobedience. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا, they asked. And this is the thing. When people have free will, they end up committing both kinds of fasad. In our greed, we end up disturbing the balance on the earth. And in our greed, following our ego, we end up disturbing people, committing oppression against them.